Afternoon, everyone. Some of us are a little sleepy this afternoon. Maybe we were up late last night watching something. All those of you have no idea what I'm talking about. Said years ago there was a massive hurricane that blew through the Carolinas in our country. And as it always does when these things take place, it just left a trail of immense wreckage. And as they said about rebuilding the homes, those who were doing the rebuilding came across something that was something of an anomaly. There was one particular area that was much like Plymouth, filled with homes, six figures, multi-million-dollar homes, almost entirely destroyed. And then about a block away, there were a set of really simple homes which were entirely still standing after the hurricane, that had been built by Habitat for Humanity. And so as they started to rebuild the homes, the builders of the McMansions walked a block to the homes that had been built by Habitat for Humanity, knocked on the door and said, "Excuse me, what did you do that we didn't?" And the people inside said, "Well, we use nails, and you use staples." And the man who was telling this story said it took a hurricane blowing through one particular area in our country for people to reevaluate how they were building their homes. It's going to take a hurricane to blow through our country for people to reevaluate how we build our marriages and our families. I would suggest the hurricane has come. All you need to do is spend a day in a counselor's office or in my office and listen to the stories that we hear from couple after couple who are struggling. Or to sit there and listen to the challenges that our parents are having right now with their children. Not the challenges that parents have always had from the moment of the fall with children, but the things that are going on now which seem to be happening at a scale and at an intensity the likes of which we've never seen before. Our parents and families are living through a virtual hurricane. Just ask any of the young families here today. And at the heart of family is marriage. So for the last few weeks, we've been preaching on living as a contagious Christian. The basic idea here is that there are certain things that you and I can do as disciples of Jesus which can infect in a very positive way those who are around us. It can attract them. It can lead them to ask us questions, hopefully so that we can facilitate an encounter, a life-changing encounter with Jesus, who, quite frankly, people, is the only hope for our race. And so today we want to talk about living as a contagious Christian husband and wife. So for the last few weeks, I've been talking to my dad more than anybody about this, with the exception of God, since my dad was the greatest man I've ever known and the greatest example of a husband and a father I've ever seen. And so I've asked him what he would want to say if he was still with us here on this earth. And if you'll believe it, I've heard him say three things. I heard him say, tell him, have a vision, have a plan, and trust in God's power. Have a vision, have a plan, and trust in God's power. So first, have a vision. Michelangelo, the great Italian sculptor and painter, said this once: the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it. Tragically, that's true for a lot of marriages. My dad was 55 years old in 1979. He just had a heart attack. He was lying in a hospital bed, dying at the time, because of the stress that he was going through in trying to save Chrysler from bankruptcy. Some of us are old enough to remember that time. I certainly am. And as he was lying in his hospital bed in Beaumont Hospital, a priest who he had never met before and never met after walked into the hospital room, walked up to his bed, looked at him and said, "John, when you die, it's not going to make one bit of difference whether or not you saved Chrysler." Now, that wasn't exactly what my dad wanted to hear at that moment. And I can't tell you what my dad said back to Father. But some weeks later, my dad was out of the hospital and he was back at work, and he was flying every single day for the better part of a month back and forth from Detroit to Washington, D.C. He flew out every morning early and he came back every night late. And he spent virtually every hour in between talking to every senator that he could, trying to secure the loan so as to save that company. He could have just stayed in Washington. Would have been an awful lot easier for him. But it was important for him to be home every night with my mom and with me and my brother. My sisters were all married at the time. In one of those meetings with one of the senators, the senator was saying something to him, or trying to say something to him, let's just say rather obliquely. My dad was many things. Oblique was not one of them. The press's nickname for my father was the flamethrower. Nothing oblique about that. Thankfully, he wasn't the flamethrower at home. And so, as the senator was talking and trying to say something, my dad just stopped him and said, "Wait a minute. Are you trying to tell me that the government won't give us the loan if I'm still the CEO?" And the man kind of hung his head, tried to avoid eye contact, and went, "Yeah." And my dad said, "Well, then that's easy. I'll just resign right now." And so he did. He didn't get a farewell party. He didn't get a watch. He didn't get a golden parachute. He just resigned. And in the words of the man whom my dad hired to take his place, my dad blew himself out of the water so as to bring Chrysler back to life. Now, why and how could he do that? What would move a man who was so clearly driven to succeed to just walk away from being CEO? Not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of the company that he led. My dad would tell you two things: priorities and vision. First, priorities. My dad's priorities were God, family, work. And he repeated that to us over and over again. And it was always that order. And no matter how bad things got at work, the order couldn't change. God, family, work. But my dad also had a vision. He had a vision for what marriage was supposed to be and for what it was that God was asking him to be. My favorite passage, I think, in all the Bible comes from Proverbs. Without a vision, the people perish. Vision, I think, drives everything. It drives our work, it drives our studies, it drives us in sports. Tragically, most married couples don't seem to have a vision. And we desperately need to reclaim a biblical vision for marriage and for family. I don't think most couples seem to realize that if they're in a valid sacramental marriage, then you're in an arranged marriage. Arranged by God for a purpose. So what's the purpose? Or perhaps we could ask it as bluntly as this: what is the point of marriage? Here's how I'd answer that. 2 years ago, my family was gathered around my father's casket, about to walk down the main aisle at Holy Name in Birmingham for his funeral. And the 5 of us siblings and my mom were the last ones to look at him and to see his face, at least on this earth. And the last look, as you might imagine, belonged to my mom, who was married to my dad for 66 years. And just before we closed the casket, my mom looked at my dad and she said these words, "Honey, because of you, I know who God is." And that, my brothers and sisters, that's the point of marriage. That's the vision that those of you who are married are supposed to have in front of you constantly, to try to make visible the invisible love of God to your husband or your wife. Marriage is a sacrament. We all know this. We hear this all the time. What's a sacrament? Well, here's a place where I think that little definition that we learned when we were in Catholic school or religious ed suddenly comes to life. So the easiest definition I know of a sacrament is this. It's a visible sign of an invisible reality instituted by Jesus, or in the case of marriage, elevated by Jesus, which gives grace. Let's try to rip that apart real quick to see what it can teach us about having a vision for marriage. So sacrament is, the most essential thing about a sacrament is that it's a sign. But it's a very special kind of sign because it causes to happen what it signifies. So 2 weeks from last night, an awful lot of people are going to get into the water of this font and get baptized. Water is going to get poured over them and they're going to get drenched. The water is the sign. What's the reality? Sin is washed away for real. So what's the sign in marriage? It's not the ring. It's not the children. It's you. It's you, John. And it's you, Kristen. You're the sign. And what is it that you point to? What is it you're supposed to make visible? Jesus and his extraordinary love for his bride, for whom he pours everything out. Do you see this, people? The task of marriage is for a husband and a wife to make visible, tangible, the love, the compassion, the mercy, the kindness, the goodness, the generosity of God. Your task as a husband or a wife, if you're married, is to so love your spouse that when he or she dies, they say to you what my mom said to my dad. Because of you, I know who God is. Now let's get real for a moment. You can't do that. Not on your own. You're good, but you're not good enough. Any more than I can do this on my own. I'm supposed to love like Jesus, the high priest. Not gonna happen. Not on my own. I'm way too selfish. I know me. You know me. I need some help. I don't need a little help. I need a lot of help. I need access to power. And God gives me access to power. And those of you who are married, he gave access to power. We call that grace. Grace is another one of those words that we just kind of throw around in the church all the time with, I think, ever understanding what it means. What's grace? Grace is strength. Supernatural strength. The easiest way I know how to think about grace is spiritual steroids. Steroids are illegal in athletics because they give the athlete an unfair advantage in competition. But here's the key. God wants you and me to win. He wants us to be great. And so he doesn't just call us to do something and say, good luck, hope you can do that. He equips us and gives us what we need. And my dad kept this vision constantly in front of him. This was the one thing he most wanted to succeed in life. And because he kept it in front of him, it infected in countless ways men around him, many of whom are in this parish, who were inspired to love their wives the way they saw my dad love his wife. And my mom inspired countless other women and infected them to love their husbands the way my mom loved my husband, or my dad. Now, essential as it is to have a vision, it ain't enough. There's a lot of basketball teams right now in the NCAA tournament, including mine, which are dreaming of cutting down the nets in San Antonio in a couple of weeks. But you better have some plays or you are just dreaming. And so it is in marriage. It takes work. Nobody just happens to become a great couple or lucks out. You got to be deliberate and intentional about doing things each and every day. And my dad would say there are 4 plays that you got to run every day to make sure you get good at if you're going to be great. Sacrifice, don't keep score, forgive, and pray. First, sacrifice. Some of us are old enough here to remember years ago when a couple got married, before they exchanged their vows, the priest would read to them a very sober exhortation about marriage. And in that exhortation, there was a line that my mom and dad used to pound into our heads when we were growing up. The line goes like this: sacrifice is always tedious and irksome. Love can make it bearable. But perfect love makes sacrifice a joy. And my mom and dad didn't just say this to us, they modeled this to us, and they lived it in such a way that it was so attractive that we learned that sacrifice is at the heart of marriage and it's at the heart of love. Second, don't keep score. Let's get real again. Everybody here is competitive, some of us dangerously so. Keeping score is for football and for basketball, not for marriage. Remember that reading that most of us had at our wedding, 1 Corinthians 13, which sounded so beautiful at the time. Love is patient, love is kind, love is gentle, it is not proud. Remember that one? What happened to that? There's a line in there, love is not resentful. And the word that's used there can also be translated as does not keep a record of, doesn't let one's mind keep going over again and again. The moment I start keeping score in marriage, I lose. We lose. Third, and very much related, my dad would say, forgive. Forgive everything. All the time. No matter what. As quickly as you can. And fourth, pray. Pray as a couple. Now, for some of us, and I know this, that's just not possible yet. Maybe our spouse doesn't come to church, or maybe we're just not on the same page and that's not going to be able to get happening. So what? Because you're one flesh in marriage, what one person does, it impacts the other. And so if even it's just you praying, he's praying with you. And that's going to rub off on them somehow. You have to trust that. Others of us here can pray as a couple. And if you can, then my parents would beg you to do that. Many of us have gone through the couple prayer series that Ken and Signe have led here many times in our parish family, and it's brought tremendous transformation in married couples. But maybe for some of us, even that seems like it might be a bit too much. So if that's the case, let me suggest the easiest way to pray as a couple that I know of, that some friends of mine teach. It's just this. before you go to bed at night, the husband takes his hand, he places it on his wife's head, and out loud he thanks God for something that he sees in his wife. And then he says, "In our Father." And then the wife places her hand on his head, and she thanks God out loud for something that she wants to honor her husband for. Then she says a Hail Mary. This is not hard. Easy peasy, right? But it bears tremendous fruit because you're praying together, and oh, by the way, you're hearing each other say something positive out loud, which I know because I'm there. You promised on the day you got married, I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. So let me say something real quick about power, because here's the challenge of hearing a homily or a talk about marriage. Nobody has the perfect marriage. So it's easy to feel like I can't do this or I'm getting beat up. Well, no one's got the perfect priesthood either, and every time I go to a talk on priesthood, I can feel beat up. My life is a mess sometimes. Who cares? God is a God of power. The gospel we just heard is the story of a family that has been devastated by death. And there are an awful lot of marriages and families in this parish which right now, today, maybe here, feel like our relationships are either dying or are dead. But Jesus bursts into this family with his power, and he raises Lazarus from the dead, and he gives Lazarus back to Martha and to Mary. And the same Jesus who did that in that gospel is in this church right now with his power, acting, wanting to break into our relationships, to restore them and to heal them. I know this because I saw it. Every couple goes through storms. My parents had severe storms in their marriage. They were married for 66 years, but they almost quit after 2. And they could have. They were tempted to, but they didn't. Because they trusted in God's power and they trusted in his love. So let me offer a really simple suggestion to those of you who are here today who are married. Go out on a date this week. And while there, talk about 3 things. Do we have a vision for our marriage? Do we have a plan? And do we trust in God's power? Nothing is impossible for God. Nothing. In the gospel, Jesus just asked the question of Martha and Mary, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, though he die, will live again. Do you believe this? Jesus didn't just ask that question to Martha and Mary. He's asking that question to us here and now in this place. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord. We believe. Now come with your power and your grace and give us what we need to do so that we can be what you've called us to be.